Hello, Ms. Vo. I'm just sitting here saying hello to everyone and not getting much response, and then realizing that I'm on mute.
I thought you were doing it intentionally.
No, I'm just being a typical dodo head. Hey, Marlene.
Hi, Kim. Hi. Are you in Northern Cal or are you in Southern Cal?
I'm in NorCal.
What's the rain situation?
Well, I'm up in north, and it's just a beautiful day.
Okay.
But last, when the big storm came through where my mother lives, we had 9 inches of rain.
That's what I heard. I heard there was a lot of rain up there.
Huge amount of rain.
Yeah.
We're grateful there wasn't more damage, and also grateful for the rain.
Yeah.
So good to see Keisha. Good to see, I saw Deanne. Let's see. I'm on a different device here. All right, I see Dr. Hager, Heather Lynn, Keisha. All right, I think we're still, Linda, short of a few. We're just a couple minutes early, so I'm confident we have some late comers.
That is correct. We are still waiting on a couple more at least before we can proceed with conducting business.
Okay.
Hey, John, I'm getting back to you. Thank you for the meeting. We're putting together a lot of information for you, okay?
Okay, and hopefully you got some of the information we sent as well as a follow-up. So thanks again. It was a great discussion.
I really appreciated it.
Thank you.
Charts and graphs for you.
We love that.
Doesn't everybody not? I'm probably going to take my photo off because I have lots of backlight here. My laptop is not working, so you're looking at my dog in the backlight and whoever happens to walk behind me. So I'll probably take myself off video.
We understand.
So Linda, we need a couple more people, a couple more commissioners.
Yes, we do need 2 more voting members to come on. So I'm just waiting for Judy and Yvette.
Oh, okay.
Oh, just, yes.
I'm here.
Sorry, Robert and Yvette. Sorry about that,
Hello,
Judy.
Judy.
It's okay.
I'm here.
It's me.
I see Jacqueline. I see Linda Aragon. There's Astrid. All right.
I just want to note that I'm actually in costume we had a mini Halloween party, so a virtual, so I apologize that I'm looking like this. So
Commissioner
my
Aragon, so you say, Commissioner Aragon.
Linda, what are you supposed to be?
I'm not in full gear, but I'm actually a public health steampunk. So I have my mask because it's good public health. And I have my glasses that are highly metallic. So,
That is
and
too
I'm
funny.
And I'm vaccinated.
Oh, good.
And I have my staff. So
Nice.
Linda, I thought you were the Mad Hatter for a Disney theme.
well, usually, I've unfortunately been back-to-back meetings since this costume, and I haven't been able to get out of it yet. So I apologize. And I have hat head, and I didn't want you all to experience that because it's not fun.
Don't apologize.
We can start now, Marlene.
Okay, thank you, Linda. Okay, welcome, everybody. Happy Halloween. Linda is our standard bearer on that one, Commissioner Aragon. So let's start with item number 1, the call to order.
Judy Abdo,
Here,
Linda Aragon,
Here.
Robert Byrd,
Here.
Frank Ramos, Astrid Hager,
Here.
Yvette Martinez.
Yvette was there.
Yvette's
I
on
just-
mute.
Here. Sorry about that.
Okay, Romales Taylor, Marlene Cepeda,
Here.
Carla Playtez Howell, Jacqueline McCroskey,
Here.
Deanne Tilton,
Here.
Keisha Woods. I
She
did
was
see
there.
She's
earlier,
here.
so I'm gonna go ahead and mark it down. Quorum is present.
I'm sorry, I am here. I tried to use a fancy way of getting mute off, so I'm here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Linda. Welcome, everybody. To our, is this our final meeting of the Program and Policy Committee meeting, Kim? For the year?
For the year, yes, for the year.
Yes, that's what I thought. It's amazing how quick time goes by. Let's move on to item number 2, the review of the Program and Planning Committee transcripts from September 23rd. If you've had a chance to look at that, and just to remind everybody about, we did receive the award for a clean audit. And so again, congratulations to that team for all the work that they did. Any comments or concerns about the transcripts?
On my end, Commissioner Cepeda, I don't have any public comments, but could we just go back a moment so I can go over the ground rules and
Oh.
cover, you will be handling the public comments if you don't mind?
Okay, let's go backwards. All right,
Thank
Linda.
Sorry about that. I just want to remind the public and all Board of Commissioners that under AB 361, all staff and board members may participate in this meeting via teleconference during declared emergencies through January 1st, 2024. And in the interest of maintaining appropriate social distancing, members of the public may observe this meeting telephonically or otherwise electronically as posted on our website and this agenda. Now, regarding public comments, there are 2 ways to submit public comment. The first way is that written public comments must be submitted in advance of the meeting via email to me at lvo@first5la.org by 1:30 p.m. the day of the meeting in order for them to be read aloud during the meeting. As a reminder, public comments emailed should indicate the item number the comment corresponds with. Any public comments received after 1:30 p.m. will become a part of public records. During the meeting, public members can also use the Q&A chat function box to express an interest in speaking to an item. It is important that these requests to speak be submitted via the Q&A chat box, which is separate from the regular chat box of the item being commented on. When submitting requests to speak, public members are asked to only provide his or her name and the item number the comment corresponds with. And all public comments received during the meeting via the Q&A chat will be addressed in the order they are received. When you hear your name called to provide public comments, you will be given the ability to speak during the meeting. And if we don't hear you begin your comment upon your name being called twice, we will call it one more time before moving on to the next public comment. 2 meetings will be allotted for each comment. And once the 2 minutes have passed for each comment, we will move on to the next public comment. And before we do begin today's meeting, please do note the following. Today's meeting will include video and audio, allowing all meeting participants and public members to view presentations via shared screen. And to minimize background disruptions, all board members and staff should place their lines on mute until called upon to speak. And to minimize multiple people speaking at the same time and to ensure for a coherent dialogue, if board members would like to speak to an item or have a question, please do text our committee chair, Marlene Cepeda, directly, or you can use the hand raise function or the chat box function, and I will coordinate with Commissioner Cepeda directly.
Thank
A
you,
reminder,
Linda.
sorry about that. A reminder, just one more thing, Commissioner Cepeda, and a reminder, if there are any technical difficulties, you can contact me at 213-276-9389. Thank you. And with that, I'll hand it back to you, Commissioner Cepeda.
Thanks, Linda, for that. I appreciate it. Okay, so going back to item number 2 on the transcripts from September 23rd, Any comments or concerns from the commissioners about the transcripts? Hearing none, I will accept them as is. And then we'll go ahead and move on to item 3, which is the data strategy presentation. And Kim Hall, our Chief Data Officer, will be making that presentation to us. So welcome, Kim.
Thank you. Give me a moment. I am going to get our slideshow started. Okay, are you guys able to view my slides?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. So good afternoon, commissioners, staff, and guests. I'm really pleased to be here today to orient you to the First 5LA data strategy and how we're thinking about its utility. I'm Kimberly Hall, the Chief Data Officer in the Office of Data for Action. So today we're going to focus on 3 items. We'll start with a discussion of current thinking about the data strategy. Then we're going to share some high-level thinking about how we're going to approach the development of the data strategy as well as its implementation. And most importantly, we'll engage in some discussion in order to get your input and feedback. Today's discussion will not focus on the specific content of the data strategy, the specifics of the data strategy development process, or exactly who will be involved. Those details still need to be worked out and will be informed by what we hear from you today. So let's begin with our current thinking about the data strategy. This first set of slides will focus on answering key questions about the data strategy, including what it is, why we need one, what kind of data priorities might be identified, who will be involved in its development, and what we hope to accomplish through the data strategy. So we'll start with the most fundamental question, which is, what is a data strategy? So first and foremost, a data strategy is going to convey our vision for using data as a tool for systems change. And to be clear, the vision is not just the type of data we want to collect, it also speaks to the broader purpose or what we intend to do with the data, which includes using it to promote policy change. And data can help with promoting policy change by really highlighting what works and demonstrating the impact of proposed policy changes so that they can be taken to scale. Another part of our vision is using data to inform practice. And we can do that by identifying deficiencies and testing improvement strategies. And lastly, we want to use data to build will. And data can support building will by increasing the awareness of community conditions and bringing attention to disparities. The data strategy is also going to include data priorities. And this is really where we articulate the types of data that are critical for achieving our systems change goals. But it doesn't stop there. The data strategy will also include or consider the infrastructure and the tools that are needed to address our data priorities and achieve the vision. So in other words, there will be attention to what needs to be in place in order to generate or access the data and what is needed to facilitate data use. And the data strategy will bring all of these components together into a plan that really identifies the steps that we need to take in order to realize our vision. I recognize that this is all very abstract, so let's walk through an example to make this more concrete. For this example, let's consider the component of our vision in which we use data to advocate for policy change. So one priority that's likely to be reflected in the data strategy is the ability to elevate family and community experiences as proof of concept. In other words, we want to elevate learning and successes from the lived experience and expertise of families and community members to really highlight what works and to demonstrate the impact of proposed policy changes. In order to realize this vision of using this type of data to advocate for policy change, not only does the data need to be captured, but there are additional infrastructure needs. For example, we need tools for sharing the data and the learnings that are derived from them so that they can be incorporated into our advocacy efforts. So given this data priority and the infrastructure needs, the data strategy plan would include an effort to generate the data, such as the Best Start Learning Agenda, which you heard about from my colleagues on the communities team earlier this spring, as well as a knowledge management system so that the findings and stories from the learning agenda can be shared with our government affairs and communication teams. So the learning agenda would be the mechanism for documenting these stories, and the knowledge management system would be a tool for making that data available for use in our advocacy efforts. So with a high-level explanation of what a data strategy is, you may be wondering, why do we need a data strategy? Don't we already know what data we need? Well, a data strategy has the potential to move us beyond a state of knowing what data we need to ensuring that data is both accessible and that it gets used to advance our strategic plan priorities. And as this slide reflects, the data we need is multifaceted. There are different types of data needs related to different parts of the work. So consistent with strategic priorities 1, 2, and 3, we need data to drive and tailor our systems change work. This kind of data is going to inform our efforts as well as our investments. Related to strategic priority 3 in the impact framework, we also need data to measure outcomes. That's data that's really going to document that what we're doing is making a difference. And consistent with strategic priority 4, we need data about our organizational effectiveness. This type of data can help us optimize how we perform as an organization, as well as our organizational culture. One key question we'll need to address as we develop the data strategy is the relative balance across these 3 areas in terms of our data priorities. Another point that I want to emphasize here is that the data strategy will focus on how we use data as much as it focuses on data being available and accessible. Finally, I want to note that this elevated focus on data at First 5LA is aligned with and reinforces the shift occurring in the external context, including our data-driven state and federal administrations and the movement towards democratizing data. So given my acknowledgement in the discussion of the previous slide that we already have a sense of the data that we need to advance our systems change goals, it's reasonable to ask, what are we going to do differently? Well, in practice, there will be many things we do differently, but I'd like to highlight 3 for purposes of the current discussion. First and foremost, we will identify our data priorities, or the types of data that are most important to achieving our vision. We will then align our resources, both our dollars as well as our staff resources, with those priorities, which could mean walking away from work that doesn't align with those priorities. And we will ensure that we are fully leveraging the available data, which is really about using that data for its intended purpose. So you may be wondering where we might land in terms of the kind of data data priorities. So keeping in mind the 3 purposes for which we will use data, this slide includes some illustrative examples, starting with examples of data to drive systems change. Here, we might prioritize data to help us understand characteristics of our target population. We might even go a step further to prioritizing data from our target population so that we can ensure that our work and the work of our system partners is informed by the preferences and priorities of families and communities. When thinking about the data that measures outcomes, we may prioritize data that demonstrates how systems are improving as a result of our efforts. We might also prioritize data on child and family outcomes, such as those captured through the impact framework result indicators. And in terms of data to optimize organizational effectiveness and culture, we may prioritize data related to what and how we fund and how we're doing as a grant maker. In the context of the data strategy, we are thinking about solutions as those things that we're going to do to address our data priorities and infrastructure needs. So it's one thing to identify what data we want to prioritize and what we need to achieve our vision. But we also need to think about what is the work that's going to get us there. And we refer to that work as solutions. So this slide lists some examples of the kind of solutions that might be included in the data strategy. We don't yet have the strategy, so these aren't definitive, but just wanted to make this more concrete. And an important point that's reflected here is that we expect solutions to include things that we are already doing as related to our current work, as well as things that we expect to do related to, or that we anticipate doing related to work that will be taking off soon, or that we envision is needed to achieve our goals. So for example, we expect to continue tracking result indicators or the conditions of children and families as a part of the impact framework. And we expect to begin measuring long-term system outcome indicators as a part of the impact framework. So we're going to continue what we're doing, and we're also going to undertake new data collection related to impact framework. We also fully expect to continue the evaluations that are related to our current initiatives and our data partnerships, like the one with the Children's Data Network. And we expect to begin new work, such as advocating at the state and federal level for higher quality and more accessible data that can be disaggregated. There are other examples here, but I won't go through all of them. Just wanted to give you a sense of the kinds of things that might be included. So now that we've discussed what a data strategy is, why we need one, and the kinds of things that it will contain, you may be wondering who will be involved in its development. We don't yet have the details of that worked out. However, I wanted to share some of our current thinking. So first, as is reflected in the gold square on the top row, I do want to note that we'll be engaging an external contractor to support this work. And I'll say more about the role of that contractor a little later. The other thing that I wanted to note is that we do intend to have an internal project team. And that project team is really going to help to shape the work of the contractor, as well as the engagement of staff within First 5LA, and ensure we are engaging the relevant partners given the different systems and spaces that we work in. And we want to have an advisory group. This advisory group is going to be comprised of both First 5LA staff as well as key external partners. This advisory group is really going to play a role in identifying those data priorities and the infrastructure needs and the solutions. So while the project team is helping to think about the process and how we do the work, the advisory group will be focused on the content of the data strategy. And we want to make sure that we're engaging our external partners as much as we are our staff in determining what those priorities are and understanding the infrastructure needs and what work we can put in place to really address those needs. The remaining groups identified on this slide will be engaged in this process, likely to a lesser extent, but we will be engaging different stakeholder groups to understand the various perspectives, the different kinds of data that are needed for different roles that people play. And we also expect that some representatives of these stakeholder groups will also be represented on the advisory group. So these groups are not mutually exclusive. So before we transition to talking about what we know about the approach, I wanted to share what we hope to accomplish through the data strategy. We expect that the data strategy will inspire and enable a shared commitment to our data priorities. As we involve internal stakeholders, external stakeholders, we can all get on the same page about what's most important and work together to achieve those goals. It will also promote increased collaboration, both within the organization as well as with our external partners. It will help us to maximize our available resources that we devote to data and data-related efforts, and we'll be in a position to really use data to drive systems change and decision-making. So now let's talk at a high level about the approach. And I want to start by talking about the contractors that will be engaging to support this work. So as I mentioned earlier, we will be engaging a contractor, and this slide reflects some of the key roles the contractor will play. One is that the contractor will serve as a thought partner on the development and the implementation of the data strategy. They'll be involved or sort of co-designing and taking the lead on the implementation of the data strategy development process. The contractor will also be engaging stakeholders and providing updates through regular communication as the process unfolds and as the data strategy emerges. Contractor is also going to take the lead on developing and disseminating products that communicate the data strategy, as well as the overall management of the process. So as I mentioned before, the process is not all worked out, but we do expect the work to be carried out in 3 phases. And so I just wanted to touch on at a high level each of the phases. So during the first phase, we expect the focus to be on developing the process and the framework for the data strategy. So what's the sequencing of involving different groups and developing criteria in order to select data priorities? And also figuring out the framework. What is the content of the data strategy? How is it going to be structured? How is it going to be organized? Those are some things that are going to happen initially. And then we'll move into the stage of actually developing the data strategy. We will be convening the advisory group, engaging stakeholders, and really prioritizing our data needs. And then finally, we'll shift our focus to supporting implementation of the data strategy. So once we know what it is and what we're going to do, we need to think through what implementation is going to look like and understand our organizational needs to implement this data strategy and make sure that the support is available so that the organization can be successful in this endeavor. So before transitioning to the discussion, I just wanted to highlight some of the next steps that speak to how we intend to continue engaging the board. So some future opportunities for board support and engagement include facilitating connections to key organizations and stakeholders. We know that board members have a lot of relationships. They know key organizations that need to be a part of this process, and we're hoping to get your support in making those connections. We also want board input and guidance as we start to think about identifying and prioritizing data needs. So we expect to engage the board in process of deciding what are the criteria that we're going to use to prioritize and what are some important data needs that we should be considering. We're also hoping that the board can share information with us and let us know about important data-related priorities and efforts that are underway that speak to the data priorities that we have. We know that you guys are aware of data efforts within organizations, within the larger community, and we want to make sure that we are tapping your knowledge so that we can take advantage of those opportunities that exist. We also want support with determining what are the right approaches to addressing data priorities, as well as support with addressing those priorities once the solutions have been identified. So we don't expect that every board member is going to be engaged in every one of these opportunities, but given where you all sit, the relationships you have, your expertise in your day-to-day work, we do want to really tap the board and lean on you all to support this effort. So I know that was a lot of information, and I'm excited to move into the discussion. So at this time, I will turn it back over to the chair, Commissioner Zepeda, to start the discussion.
Thank you, Kimberly. Thank you for that. This is a very high-level discussion of the data strategy. Some of the commissioners individually have been involved with separate conversations around this, but I welcome at this time any questions or comments by the commissioners. I don't see any texts, Linda.
I don't have any text messages, and I don't see any comments on chat as well from commissioners.
Okay. I have a question. Let me just maybe prime the pump a little bit here. Kimberly, you mentioned the role of commissioners in this process. Did we get a time frame about how this is going to be laid out over the next year or so? Because this is just the introduction, right? This is just the beginning. I think that would be of interest to the commissioners. And also, if you could just reiterate, I know you spoke to me about this personally, about the impact framework and where that falls into this discussion. Some of us were involved with that impact framework discussion over the last few years. So if you could react to that.
Yes, I'm happy to. Thank you for those questions. So I'll start with the question around the time frame, acknowledging that we have not yet fully developed a plan, but I did speak to sort of the 3 phases of the work and how we'll shift our focus over time. I do want to note that those phases may overlap. So it's not as if one ends before the other begins, but just to kind of give a general sense of the different parts of the work. Starting with the first phase, which is really the process development and the development of the framework. We anticipate that that's going to happen over about a 4-month period. And so we're looking at really launching this work in December and through the end of early next spring, through the end of March. And that's when we expect for the data strategy development process to really get underway. That's when we're going to start engaging our internal teams to understand data priorities related to our particular investments. We'll be engaging external partners to understand data priorities as it relates to the broader systems, even outside of our particular investments. And when we'll start to, identify those data priorities. We're anticipating that data development process is going to likely span about 9 months. And so we're looking at having a data strategy in place by the end of next calendar year. So likely December of 2022. Again, that's just an estimate or sort of an anticipated timeline at this point. And we're really going to move into the phase where we're focused heavily on supporting implementation in the following year. So some of the support for implementation, thinking about what we need to have in place, will start as the data strategy starts to emerge, but we'll focus more heavily on that in the following year from 2023.
And the impact framework?
So hopefully,
yeah. You want to comment on that?
Yeah. Absolutely. So we're seeing the impact framework as a key component of our data strategy. So one of the areas that I talked about us wanting to focus on is outcomes, and not just getting data to inform what we do, but getting data that demonstrates what we're doing is making a difference. And that's where the impact framework comes into place. And so many of you may recall that last year we released our first impact framework report. And that report was focused on child and family conditions. And we called them result indicators because they align with our results for children and families. That work will continue. And that work is expected to align with sort of that category of data that's around measuring outcomes. But we know that we also intend to make change in area in systems, and not just at the population level. And so we also intend to sort of identify the indicators that are going to help us understand the change in the outcomes that we're seeing at the system level. So all of the different types of indicators that are part of the impact framework will also be sort of embedded within the data strategy. So the data strategy is almost as an umbrella for our data-related efforts, of which the impact framework is one.
Okay, thank you. I believe Commissioner McCroskey has a comment.
Thank you. This is a really exciting moment. My comments are very practical, and I really bringing them up here for discussion with the board, but also for your reaction, Kim. So anybody who is in the data business knows that it can be very expensive. And the timeline is not necessarily in concert with when you're looking for answers to the questions that you have. That all leads me to think, based on previous conversations I've had with you, Kim, that a central part of this data strategy is to build on what already exists, to work with partners who are already collecting data that's relevant to what First Five is doing, and to think about enhancing those partnerships. I don't necessarily mean I don't know what I don't mean. What I do mean is for the good of everybody. In other words, every organization has its primary focuses, and certainly First Five has a really complex set of focuses. But if you pick, any county department, for example, or any large non-for-profit agency, there will be in the child and family arena, there'll be some overlap. And so I'm assuming that that's a piece of this whole, it's First Five's data strategy, but based on the partnerships that you have in place, the partnerships that we need to create, and thinking ahead about what the next steps are for some of your key partners. For example, I'm thinking in particular about the county CIO, Chief Information Officer office, where they are developing some really exciting new platforms that I'm assuming we'd want to be allied with, or they're working on a county-wide information referral platform and a information hub which looks at data across county departments, et cetera, that all of those things could be places from which we could draw really useful information. My assumption is not that every question we want to answer there's data for, but rather that you start with what is, and you work from that, and then you think ahead about where the major priorities are in terms of data gaps. Does all that kind of fit with your thinking to date, Kim?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much for raising this question, Commissioner McCroskey. Everything that you said, I would ditto. So this data strategy is not about undertaking a new data development effort and trying to fill all of the gaps that exist across the system. It is about understanding what data is most important. And a part of the reason why we want to engage external stakeholders and our data partners and system partners and advocacy partners is so that they can also help inform us of data that's already available, or ways that we can, take advantage, leverage existing information and leverage existing, systems and infrastructure to support sort of filling the data needs that we have. So we certainly intend to, take advantage of that. I mentioned in the slide on how commissioners can be involved, and noted there that we want commissioners to help us understand and be aware of what's already occurring so that we can use what is already there. And as you alluded to, we want to work with our data partners to really align the work that we're doing to the data strategy. We know that much of what already is being done in collaboration with our data partners is in service of our systems change work. And so as the data strategy emerges, we want to continue that kind of alignment to make sure that there's a tight connection between that work and addressing our data priorities. So certainly we are not looking to undertake a lot of new work. There may be some instances where we recognize that we do need to fill a data gap. In some cases, those are very likely to be related to work that we're already doing. So there is I would say, a paucity on data that really reflects family and community voice. And we have a project that we're about to get underway with the Best Start Learning Agenda, where we really intend to sort of tap into and better understand that family and community voice. And so we want to bring that into the data strategy. And that is maybe a unique role or a data gap that First 5LA can fill, but that is very specific to our investments, as opposed to looking at the broader system and trying to address some higher, maybe more overarching kinds of data gaps.
Other questions, comments from commissioners? Linda, I don't have anything on text.
Dr. Hager just raised her hand.
Okay, Commissioner Hager.
Hey, Merman, I think my concern has been in building a system within the child abuse world here, and I think Deanne probably has had the same experience, is that there are an awful lot of barriers in the county to sharing any information. And the barriers are usually raised by county council. So I know that we want to be inclusive, and I appreciate that. I've never encountered speed bumps quite like the ones that are in the way of data sharing. So, I mean, maybe we could get their advice on, because a lot of this data exists obviously in the public sector. So we tried this some years ago, and I think that DMH probably could also, I don't know whether Robert can relate to this or not, but I think the idea of sharing the data between us was really tough. And, you know, we built a system in the health systems that's become state of the art, but we still have gaps in linking it back to DCFS and to DMH. So I'm just suggesting that we ask their advice as well before we get too far down the road and find out that there are actually spikes in those speed bumps. And that we are, I personally, I think we need to have a universal database where we can access the information about the most vulnerable and the people in need. But that's been met with a certain amount of blocks from lawyers. If you're a lawyer, you can raise your hand so we don't discriminate against you openly, but it is an issue. That's my only comment.
Well, thank you for that comment. I do want to note that when we reference infrastructure needs, or like what do we need in order to make the data accessible, data sharing agreements is one of the things on the list. We recognize that we do want to use or get access to existing data where possible. And in some instances that will require data sharing agreements. But as Commissioner Hager just alluded to, it may not always be possible to get the kind of data sharing agreements that we'd like to have. And I think in those instances, one of the things that we would want to do is consider the kind of partnership with the CIO office that Commissioner McCroskey just alluded to, where the CIO is sort of the keeper, or sort of a mechanism for getting access to county level data that doesn't require, to data from county agencies that doesn't require First 5LA to necessarily get the data or have access to private data, but their ability to access data, link data across different public agencies can allow or enable us to do some of the analysis or answer some of the questions that we have without us necessarily having our hands on that data, which may violate some of the privacy concerns that were raised. So certainly a very good point, and a hurdle that we expect to encounter, and that we hope that we can engage our partners in helping us to think creatively about how to resolve.
Okay. Thank you, Kim. Other questions or comments from commissioners? Linda, I'm not getting any other text. Use any hands raised?
I don't see any others as well.
Okay, I do have just a general comment, Kimberly, about just the whole strategy. Because when I was looking at the policy write-up that's coming, our next presentation, I saw this really like the synergy between what they're doing in terms of their priorities that they lay out and what this data strategy is going to be about. And so in my mind, I was thinking about like a cross-tabbing kind of situation. In this first 5 advisory, you're going to have policy people on there in that advisory. I think that would be good. And frankly, I think the spike in the road is going to be trying to figure out how to prioritize. We cannot be all things to all people. Our funds are going down, and we have to think very strategically. And I also think that we have to think about short term, what can we accomplish in the short run versus what is accomplishable, is that a word, in the long run. And I always reflect back on the Best Start program that was a decade in the making. And I'm not sure we have those kinds of resources to put in for a 10-year investment, but those are thoughts that go through my head when I'm thinking about this data strategy approach. But I know that you're giving us a 10,000-foot view at this juncture. So if there are no other questions or comments from commissioners, Linda, is there any public comment on this item?
There are no public comments on this item.
Okay. Well, I thank you, our Chief Data Officer, Kimberly Hall. She's done a fantastic job on this. And we're scheduled for about a 10-minute break. So it's 2:15 on my clock. Oh, it's 2:13 on the computer. So we're taking a 10-minute, right? Okay, so we will be back in 10 minutes. So go stretch your legs. Okay, it is 2:23. 10 minutes have passed, so I'm hoping that you're all getting back on. Linda, give me a thumbs up when we have all our commissioners back on. I don't see my full screen on this thing. That's my problem.
We're waiting for a few more commissioners.
Okay.
Commissioner Zepeda, it looks like we could proceed. The other commissioners who had their cameras previously off, they still have their cameras off.
Okay. They may be on, is that what you're saying, but they just have their cameras off? Okay.
So
Okay, let's go ahead then. Okay, welcome back, everybody. Hope you had a good break. Let's move on to item 5, which is our 2021 policy review and our 2022 agenda refinement and priorities ahead. That's the title of the item. Our presenters today are Charna Whidbey she's our Chief Government Affairs Officer, Office of Government Affairs and Public Policy. Ofelia Medina, our Senior Policy Strategist from that same office, as well as Andrew Olnick, who is our Senior Policy Analyst from that same office. So welcome to the three of you, and we look forward to your presentation.
Thank you, Commissioner Zepeda. Can everybody see my screen? Okay, perfect. Good afternoon, commissioners and members of the public and First 5 LI staff. We are very excited. Maybe, there we go. We are very excited to present to you a review of the 2021 legislative session in California, as well as an update to our ongoing policy agenda refinement efforts and where we are anticipating focus and contribution in 2022. We have some questions for you at the end of our presentation about narrowed priorities and focus, and are really hoping for robust conversation about priorities and impact in your reflections as you hear this today. So there's more detailed, weedy information in the materials provided, and we are a team of very wonky people, so we are happy to have conversations about specifics as well, but want to start with an overview of what's happened in as 2021 was a very interesting, challenging, and busy year for policy work in California, especially since the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic in the last year. The context in which we do our policy-related work has also constantly changed, requiring us to be both strategically opportunistic and nimble, which in turn should allow us to have greater impact and greater focused impact through our work. Perhaps the most critical development this year was the state's record budget surplus of nearly $75 billion, which led to a 2021 state budget that provided significant direct relief to families and investments to the state support systems. We saw both the Newsom administration and lawmakers utilize the budget making process more extensively to pass policy this year. Legislatures continued to limit their number of bills that they carried, which narrowed priorities, and the volume of legislation also largely took a backseat to the administrative policy changes that we saw. This included large-scale policy changes to health and early learning systems, including an overhaul of the Medi-Cal and the transition of childcare programs from the State Department of Education to the Department of Social Services. Certain legislation that carried costs to the state were vetoed because they didn't receive funding in the state budget. And the governor also vetoed bills that he said were duplicative of efforts that state agencies and departments had already started. The introduction of new Medi-Cal benefits and including dietetic care services, doulas, and community health workers are a good case in point for that. Those benefits pass through the state budget and their contours are being determined by state departments with an opportunity for us to provide feedback on what benefits should specifically include. More broadly, during COVID-19 crisis, families have been able to more flexibly receive various supports. The pandemic's demonstrated that reducing barriers to care, including through virtual services, reduced eligibility requirements, increased and direct economic supports, are all possible and should continue if we want to close disparities, increase access, and optimize development during the earliest years of a child's life. Finally, briefly on the context of the federal level, the changing makeup in Washington has allowed us to advocate for investment in structural improvement to key supportive structures and to move out of the largely defensive position we've been in the last years. We're also continuing to track negotiations around the large human infrastructure Congress is debating for potential local impacts and investments. Especially disappointing this morning as paid family leave fell out. But we're still focused on the historic and large investments in universal preschool and childcare. So here we wanted to share a selection of case studies of the last year where we have worked with teams from across the organization to promote First 5 LA strategic outcomes and goals. As the road from Sacramento policymaking to addressing the issues that face young children and families down here in LA is long and can often get derailed at many points, these vignettes provide an opportunity for tailoring our strategies to the unique needs of Los Angeles County. So, for example, we have continuously and consistently messaged the need to ensure families have access to language and culturally responsive supports like doulas and community health workers. As we move into 2022, we'll continue to work to track implementation and incorporate utilization into our continued advocacy. This is a strategy that focuses on tracking and impact storytelling in Sacramento to shape policy. We don't see these new benefits as a standalone priority. The implementation and utilization of all new benefits are important building blocks for us. These and postpartum eligibility extension will be key to our storytelling in support of the First 5 Association's ask for children's continuous eligibility and for the development of future benefits yet to be defined. The California Advancing and Innovating Medi-Cal Reforms, or CalAIM, is another case study in response to proposals that the State Department of Healthcare Services released. First 5 LA advocated that young children and pregnant and postpartum women be included as populations of focus and that evidence-based home visiting be added. Internally, we coordinated with both the health systems and the family supports teams to engage with local health plans, identify policy opportunities for shared priorities, and uplift best practices to state policymakers, including screening tool development. This is a strategy of understanding where we know health plans and health advocates are hyper-focused. It's the context and the priorities they are focused on, and thus is an important context for us to be mindful of competing and operating in within as well. The state also continued the process this last year of re-procuring contracts for commercial managed care plans that provide Medi-Cal services. So after the release of the draft that laid out new responsibilities for plans, First 5 LA advocated that the state should prioritize awarding contracts to managed care organizations that have strong records on and existing commitments to improving child and maternal health. We will continue to advocate for preventative and early intervention so that systems, specifically health systems in this case, but systems prioritize and anticipate families at the earliest moments possible. Universal preschool is a significant and transformative moment in California's early learning system. the implementation of UPK or UTK, whichever materials you may be reading in the next year will have ripple effects on the childcare more broadly, offering us a significant opportunity to advance and accelerate priorities to promote integrated services, systems alignment, and supports for mixed delivery systems. And the last vignette, policy near and dear to our hearts in the Office of Government Affairs and Public Policy, is guaranteed basic income, which at the state, federal, and local levels has emerged as an increasingly popular policy initiative. With all these income pilots, we have focused on shaping efforts to ensure direct income supports are provided to pregnant women and new mothers in Medi-Cal, and include or prioritize early childhood as a special population to consider. We're also tracking and continue the various pilots across the state and in other states that may include or could include and prioritize prenatal to 5 as a population, so that we can learn and tailor our recommendations as we go. So as you can hopefully see, our commitment to the core principles in our policy agenda are the same, but we have the opportunity to show up in different places with a lot of different ways based on the identified policy agenda priorities. So now I want to move to our efforts related to the refined First 5 policy agenda. First 5 LA specifically. Work to change the public policy is critical toward how we achieve First 5 LA strategic goals. The policy agenda itself is the authorizing document for First 5 LA's policy and advocacy work, clarifying the federal, state, and local policy priorities that we engage in. Because we know that policy change occurs at several levels of government, and we use it to inform, prioritize, and sequence administrative, budget, and legislative work to align with our strategic priorities. The policy agenda is not a legislative agenda, and this is an important distinction for us because the policy agenda is more expansive and holistic than a legislative agenda. It provides more opportunities for action and defines the perspectives that we bring to policy development tables, and where we say, not us. We use the policy agenda to guide our formal analysis of policy proposals and as our blueprint to develop policy recommendations and to inform priorities. And finally, the policy agenda guides our efforts to change policy impacts in the short and the long term. In the short term, we can address the immediate needs of children and families, and in the long term, address the underlying drivers of poor child and family outcomes, as well as the root cause of inequities. We've worked hard to expand the scope and the reach of our analysis and advocacy over the last 2 years. And in this refined strategic plan, in order to better account for those factors and ultimately make our policy work more impactful and focused. So we're currently in the process of completing refinements to our 2022 policy agenda. To accomplish that, we reviewed the 2021 agenda to see where there were gaps. We utilized lessons learned, incorporated the most up-to-date learnings from investments and lived experience, and reevaluated the current policy context, which was particularly important in this pandemic, where things change frequently and rapidly. And following this meeting and your questions and reflections that you bring today, we will further revise and return to the board in November. So in a week, we will come back to you for final approval and adoption. And now I'll hand it to Andrew and Ophelia to walk through the revisions and talk about the 2022 refined policy agenda.
Great. So to start, throughout the policy agenda refinement process this year, a critical question has been how to better embed our value of equity throughout the document and subsequently our policy-focused work. Ultimately, we included First 5 LA's equity values within a preamble section that acts as the foundation for and provides the overarching principles of the overall policy agenda and the priorities that are identified within it. This is because we see work to promote equity and close disparities not as a separate or individual priority, but rather as embedded throughout the entirety of our policy work. The three overarching equity values are work to close race-based disparities across health, well-being, and opportunity, utilize the best available data and advocate for the availability of full, complete, and disaggregated data, and promote a holistic system of supports that is linguistically and culturally responsive. While these are similar to the equity principles included in the 2021 policy agenda, we clarified that support should be linguistically and culturally responsive rather than appropriate as we had last year. Culturally responsive is a more inclusive term than appropriate, and including linguistically acknowledges that language accessibility is key and must happen in tandem with any culturally responsive practices. This overall orientation builds out of the 2020-2028 strategic plan, which is grounded in a commitment to closing disparities and ending inequities that impact many children in LA County starting even before birth. As you may recall, equity was adopted as an organization-wide value and investment guideline, and our commitment to equity shows up across all of our policy-related priorities as we advocate for policies, data, and culturally relevant supports. So with that bit of context, we can move forward and discuss the 4 priority areas and the goals and priorities that we've set for the upcoming year. So the first priority here is most closely related to the work we align with family supports investment areas. However, as with all of the policy priority areas, we see these as guiding principles and priorities across sectors, and we are defining our perspectives for when we engage in these areas. You won't necessarily see large deviations from the previously approved agenda, but rather nuanced refinements as we continue to narrow and shape the perspectives we bring to tables. For this year, we've maintained the same goal to promote a comprehensive system of family supports to advance positive outcomes for the whole child and whole family. Just as a point to note, we consulted with the Office of Data for Action here, which suggested the utilization of positive outcomes because that term is measurable, and the ability to measure outcomes is something that we maintain across all of our priority areas, especially related to ensuring successful policy implementation. The priorities in this area now include to build systems that connect families to effective, evidence-based, innovative, and community-responsive resources, prioritizing home visiting and early intervention services. Advance and protect family supports to ensure families with young children and pregnant people are economically secure. And reduce barriers so children prenatal to 5 years old receive supports and services that promote healthy development at the earliest opportunities. Overall, we feel that these priorities allow us to support the efforts of the family supports team in advancing their work around building a universal home visiting system, while also providing the Office of Government Affairs and Public Policy with space to push broader policies that support families at the systems level. Next we have priorities that are most closely related to the work we align with health systems. The umbrella priority is improve systems to promote the optimal development of children through early identification and supports. One important refinement here was removing that are family responsive from the end of this statement, which had appeared in the 2021 agenda. This was especially to refine our language because that health systems related work is intending to support families is a given. The priorities within this section are promote alignment and integration through early identification, early intervention, and family strengthening systems, ensure children receive early and periodic validated developmental, health, and behavioral screenings, and appropriate trauma-informed interventions, and incentivize preventative care to close maternal and pediatric health disparities. We've refined the first priority to reflect current opportunities to strengthen systems of supports that young children and their families interact with. And this would most closely apply to our advocacy within the context of CalAIM and Medi-Cal managed care plan reprocurement. The second and third points here feature refined language and point to our work focused on health equity, improving African-American infant and maternal outcomes, and ensuring children receive vital screenings and appropriate interventions. This is especially important because children ages prenatal to 5 years old are really a special population, even compared to children more broadly defined, and ensuring greater access to developmental supports and health services promotes optimal health and lifelong success.
So now we will review priorities that reflect our vision for the work we intend to do over the next year related to early learning. Our overarching goal for EC this year's policy agenda continues to be expand access to affordable quality care and education. While that broader heading continues to be the same as our previous policy agenda, we made critical changes to the 3 priority areas. The first priority is to increase public investment in early learning, prioritizing family choice and infant and toddlers. The idea behind this priority is that it is broad enough for us to lift and advocate for mixed delivery, while at the same time elevating the need for infant and toddler care, which continues to be a crisis locally, but also across the state. This also supports and advances the new and exciting work that the EC team is taking on with the landscape analysis on home-based care, which will inform our definitions of quality, mixed delivery, and family choice in our advocacy efforts. The second priority is to ensure an equitable early learning quality support structure that responds to the diverse cultural and linguistic assets of children and providers. Our hope is that this will continue drumming the beat on equitable and inclusive policies at the federal, state, and local levels, while again also being reflected of the current work within ECE, such as our quality QSLA work and the prioritization of dual language learners. And lastly, required benefits and fair pay for all early learning providers that reflect the critical roles they play. This was inspired by the historic investments at the state budget and federal administration have made over the past year, particularly raising the reimbursement rate for providers and elevating childcare as part of the infrastructure package. Both OGAP and the EC team wanted to maximize on this policy window and push federal, state, and local governments to continue investing in supporting early learning field even more, because while this past year has resulted in more money than we've seen in the field in many years, we also know that this is still not nearly enough to cover the true cost of care. Next slide. And finally, we will now review the last priority area, which is focused on the resources, social conditions, and the environment needed to support young children and families. These priorities also align most with the work being led by and informed by our communities team, who work hand in hand with the best rate regions. The overarching goal reads, ensure communities have the resources and the environment that supports optimal development of children prenatal to age 5, with prenatal to age 5 being the main addition to this overarching goal. The thinking behind this augmentation was to recognize that community conditions are imperative to healthy and optimal development, while also narrowing in on young children and families. The 3 priorities laid out on this current version of the policy agenda are: advocate for communities' increased opportunities to shape resources, services, and social conditions to protect the well-being of young children and families, promote local flexibility and policies and systems that directly impact families and neighborhoods, and elevate and utilize disaggregated data on the conditions of children and families to inform efforts in reducing barriers to access and improving the quality of service delivery systems. The decision to move from increase to advocate in the first bullet was due to our recognition that opportunities for community voices to shape resources goes beyond what we at First 5 can actually do, rather identifying those opportunities within systems and helping to amplify community voice is where our strength really lies. The second bullet remains unchanged from last year's policy agenda, and the last bullet is also mostly the same, except for the call out on the elevation and utilization of disaggregated population, instead of just simply making it more effective. So as we continue the journey on our policy agenda refinement, we're also thinking about next steps going forward. That includes identifying and developing shared problem statements that bridge both the direct particular investment and the root cause of those problems that OGAP will continue to advocate towards. Related to implementation of key 2021 budget items, OGAP will focus on collaborating with teams and offices internally to support the guidance developed and support the implementation of the new dyadic care, doula, and community health worker benefits and Medi-Cal, and the first steps of setting up the new state's UPK system. On the administrative policy and advocacy side, focusing on population health strategies, shaping managed care organization priorities, and defining the mixed delivery system and reimbursement rate reform is in early learning. And finally, we know that next year is the second year of the state's legislative session. So bills that fail to advance all the way through the legislature can continue next year. So for example, a bill like SB 316, which First 5 LA is supporting, and will expand access to supports at federal qualified health clinics. So even as we hope the pandemic will slow and eventually come to an end in 2022, increasing flexibility and decreasing barriers to access will be important components of our policy-focused work into the future.
Thank you, Athalia. So questions for you all now. We don't know what else is going to come for us in January, of course, and new legislation. We know that the budget is forecasted to have another surplus, but as we apply this policy agenda to the opportunities we have now, that's our best thinking. So as we conclude, we want to ask if we're missing anything strategically, specifically as we narrow our focus in each of our priority areas, and as we take steps towards integrating our policy agenda into a whole child and whole family framework, what priorities are we not capturing? And we've made efforts to improve and update the language to be more specific and accurate. And this is an ongoing process. So we are committed to doing this every year as we learn and improve. Are there places that we can be more realistic and say, these are important areas to support, but not where First 5 LA should be investing staff and fiscal resources to lead? And lastly, are there places where we could do something better or define something more specifically? So thank you all for your attention as we tried to be brief, but of course got too deep, and look forward to your thoughts.
Thank you for that presentation. Commissioners, do I have any questions or comments?
I don't see it on my end.
All right, let me start the conversation then with the group. Number one, thank you for the presentation. I really appreciated the comment that was made regarding having a policy agenda as opposed to just a list of legislative priorities, if you will, because in the old days, that's what we would get. We would get like an Excel spreadsheet of, okay, we're supporting this one, we're supporting that one, we're watching this one, we're watching the other one. Here we have a more, I think, coherent approach. And I appreciate all the work that you've done over the summer. I know it was like crazy this summer with everything that was going on with the budget. I'm disappointed in some of the things that didn't occur. But I'm pleased that we've gotten so much funding. I would like to talk a little bit about rate reform for family childcare providers, because I don't think I saw it in your piece, but with the pandemic funding, there was an increase in rate reform, right? And that will be reduced after those monies are, and that in conjunction with losing so many of our family childcare homes, the rate reform issue is huge. And I'm wondering where we are on that. It looked like it was vetoed by it didn't go through, right, on here. And is that going to come up again in the next session? And, and I have to think it's just a matter of dollars and cents in terms of the state budget, but that is a concern that I have. So I was wondering what's the backstory here on rate reform at this juncture?
I'll hand it to Athalia as our lead there.
So I think we're all on the same page, Commissioner Cepeda, like really happy to see some investments, but really disappointed in seeing other investments and other much more critical administrative policies as well. I will say that there's been talks of having the rate reform resurface next year in a similar bill to really think about not just the rate reform, but also making sure that there's a system in place that will lead us that way. A lot of the work, especially for our policy agenda, goes hand in hand with the work that the EC team is doing. So really thinking about that whole-based landscape analysis to really think about where is it that we stand in LA County with our home-based providers, and being able to elevate that then at the state level when those conversations do emerge again, because they will emerge. I think it was because of the influx in funding, it was a band-aid to the solution, but it's definitely not something that will continue keeping the infrastructure going.
Well, the other issue is that many of our home-based providers, these women are in their 60s and 70s. They are not going to be and many of them have told me they are not going to take care, they cannot physically take care of infants. It's too much work. And so without rate reform, who are we going to attract into this workforce? It's a big concern going forward, particularly with transitional kindergarten sucking up all the 3 and 4-year-olds. It's not a pretty picture, I think, going forward. So we have to look at rate reform. So that's my soapbox for the day. Any other questions or comments from commissioners on this? I know it was quite a bit.
Sorry.
Judy has her hand up.
Yeah, and also Commissioner McCroskey texted me. So let's go with Judy, and then we'll go to Jacqueline.
Well, I think rate reform is essential. But I'm wondering if we're watching what's going on in the federal government and what's going on in our state and trying to sort of be on the same page, or get them on our page, maybe is another way of saying it, so that we understand exactly what's happening. I don't know, did they vote today? I'm not sure. And I don't know what the federal proposal is. But beyond rate reform, I think there is the larger issue of having families have an easier way to get services. Right now, they have to go through an enormous amount of paperwork and understanding of what they're eligible for, which could be one thing or another thing, depending on how they answer a question. So I'm hoping we can look at making it easier for families to get the kinds of services that we want them to get, and make it easier for family daycare and center-based care to actually administer both state and federal funding. I don't know if that is coherent enough, but those are the things that I worry about.
I share all of those worries and concerns. We are tracking federal implementation and have started a process of analysis to have a parallel path to advocate to the state about unallocated resources and trying to identify that proactively so that we can prioritize, although we know ongoing rate reform is a state issue largely, but the federal money will help us leverage, and we are positioning ourselves to be that translator as well.
I think also with the transfer chapter programs from CDE over to the Department of Social Services, I think one of their goals, or continues to be, is really making it easier for families to receive services, right? So if a family applies for childcare, automatically also being able to link families with what other type of services they could be eligible for. So really, for the OGAC team is really monitoring how that transition continues to happen, and what feasibility there is to make that available for families, so that they do receive the services that they need without having to fill out 100+ forms.
Well, I hope you're right about that, and I definitely hope for that, of course. And maybe Keisha has some insight as to what's going on with Head Start and the federal funding.
Hey, hello all, and thanks to I don't have much more to offer than what our staff talked about, that usually are pretty thorough. Just from standing back and looking from my perspective, I think that we are in a place in time where I could say it's very exciting, but it's also very chaotic. And with chaos brings about opportunity for change. We really need to focus on mixed service delivery. And right now, we talk mixed service delivery, but we're not putting systems in place to support mixed service delivery. Most of the things from my perspective and my experience that are coming forth is going to position the Congress argument to block grant Head Start. And so there won't be the federal influx as we know it at this point, particularly when we start talking about the income levels that keep going up for California. But how do we become a part of the Biden's universal pre-kindergarten design without calling it just transitional kindergarten? Transitional kindergarten for me is a part of the mixed service delivery. It is not the universal approach across. And so how do we broaden our thinking and make sure we're supporting a continuity of support for children from birth through kindergarten with various types of funding where children or families don't necessarily need to know what that funding is, as long as they're all getting quality services. And that can be done through center-based, that can be done through family child care, that can be done through many different means, but we have to all talk the same thing, and I don't believe we're doing that right now.
Well, it seems to me that we need to have LACO and First Five in close conversations about this so that we're as effective as we possibly can be with a common message.
And I would add, Judy, that the director of ECE, Rebecca, she and I, we do spend a lot of time talking about this, as we do with the Office of the Advancement of ECE, Deborah Coleman. So we are really trying to maximize the relationship that we started because of COVID with the COVID response team and take it somewhere else in a more broader system support across the county.
Thank you. Commissioner McCroskey, I think, has a question or a comment.
Definitely rate reform and mixed delivery system. It seems to me like the third part of that stool is workforce development. And maybe I just missed it, Ophelia, but does workforce development fit in this policy agenda as well?
It does. You won't specifically see workforce development, but you would see required benefits. So the benefits piece can include professional development as well.
Okay, thanks.
Other questions from commissioners? Okay, hearing none. Is there any public comment on this item, Linda?
There aren't any public comments on this item as well.
Okay. All right. Well, I think that concludes our agenda for today. So we're stopping a little early. Thank you all for participating. And I wish you a great weekend, and we'll see you at the next meeting. Take care, everybody.